what is the great significant proclamation this angel has? Well, it is, do not damage the earth or the sea or the trees. Now, what we need to recognize here is these angels are holding back the winds. But by saying do not damage, right, the earth or the sea or the trees, we're not just talking about, a nice gentle breeze. We're talking about winds that have extreme force. Right? We're talking about like gale force winds, tornado type winds, hurricane type winds. Right? We're talking about something that is very, very destructive. And those winds are being held back. Right? It's because if they were let go, they would damage the earth, the sea, or the trees. The other thing to be thinking about here as well is, and it has to do with this, is this prior to the seals or is it something to come after? The plagues that he's talking about, the damaging of the earth, the sea, and the trees, we will see in the seventh seal once the 7 trumpets are started to be blown. A lot of the activity is damage done to the earth. Now again, is this a prophecy of a literal spate of tornadoes and hurricanes? Probably not. The idea, of course, is just the destructive power that's at God's disposal, and he is not going to unleash it until his servants are protected. And so, don't damage the earth until. Right? So, it's not a blanket statement. It's a, up until this point, once this is completed, the assumption is this is going to let go. It's going to break loose. And so until we have marked the servants of our God, why are these people sealed? Well, there have been a couple suggestions, surprisingly. Is it to protect them from physical harm? Meaning that once these destructive forces start to be released on the earth, the people that are sealed are going to be protected from physical harm from them. When you think about somebody caught in a tornado or hurricane, sandstorm, right, the great physical damage that can be done, and so are the people going to be protected from physical harm? It's the purpose of sealing them to protect them from demonic forces. Because we will see in later chapters, some of these plagues are, there are demonic forces that are operative here. Is it to protect them from losing their faith? And that being sealed will allow them to remain faithful to God through the challenges that are coming, through the plagues that are getting ready to take place. So what do you think? Which of those sounds most likely to you? Or maybe you have another option.
I've always figured it as just a means of spiritual protection. Because when all said and done, these will be worth me.
Okay.
They were not harmed, so to speak.
Or even if they were like killed and destroyed or whatnot, that their souls specifically is what is sealed and been protected.
Yeah, it seems like, while I could understand the idea of protection from physical harm, that doesn't seem likely. Because we've already seen in chapter 6, right, that there are souls under the altar who have lost their lives. And God never anywhere promises, or nor does Christ anywhere promise people protection from physical harm for following him. Instead, he warns the disciples, the apostles, that was a very likely possibility. And so I think probably that if we understand this as, there's some sort of spiritual protection. I don't think it's quite this. Protecting them from losing their faith. Because it just doesn't seem like that's a necessary promise either. but something about that spiritual protection and remaining faithful to Him. If they trust in God, He will protect them through it. Right? If they remain faithful. Because we've seen the churches in those first, in the second and third chapter, a lot of them are starting to accommodate the culture. And so they're on the verge of falling away, if not already. And so, it's not necessarily a promise to protect them from losing their faith, as much as it is a conditional promise of, if you remain faithful, you'll be protected. The seal that they receive is on their foreheads. Now, why on their foreheads? What do you think might be the purpose of putting it on their foreheads?
It's very obvious and visible.
Yeah, it's, you can't really hide it too well. And so it's obvious to other people, but then also obvious to these forces that are going to be enacting these things. Hey, this person belongs to God, I can't do certain things.
It also go back to the whole idea of where He tells God tells His people to find His words on their forehead.
Yeah, there might be that idea, of course, with it connected to, kind of into the brain kind of thing, right? The mind connection there. That's kind of the front of your mind. And so, the obviousness of it, the connection with other passages about, the binding of the Word between your eyes, the connection with the physical brain. What we'll see later is when the mark of the beast comes up. The mark that they receive is either on their forehead or on their hands, suggesting kind of this, it's kind of a demonic imitation of the seal that is received here. This idea of sealing is a very important one in Scripture, and in thinking about this idea of sealing, there are several passages I think that probably help us get the understanding of, or serve as the foundation. Exodus chapter 12, of course, is the story of the Passover. That first Passover. And so the Israelites, of course, commanded to kill a lamb, roast it, but then take the blood and put it on their doorpost. For what reason? What was the purpose of putting the blood on the doorpost? Right? So this idea of they're making this sign so that they escape the death that was coming. Right? And so there might be some connections there, because we've talked about that Passover lamb concept that has already been up. And so perhaps that's in the background. One passage that I think is really definitely connected here is Ezekiel chapter 9. Ezekiel chapter 9 and 10. If you've never really read them, when you read them and really understand what's going on there, these are very, very disturbing and almost sad chapters. And so in chapter 8, Ezekiel has been taken to back to Jerusalem. Right? He's with the captives in Babylon. The Spirit has taken him back to Jerusalem, and God shows him all the idolatrous worship that is going on. It's going on in the temple. It's in the temple courts. There are people bowing down to the east. Right? So the temple's behind them. They're ignoring the temple to bow down to sun deities. And in chapter 9, it's been enough. So chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. Then he cried in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, "Draw near, you executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand." And 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his weapon for slaughter in his hand. Among them was a man clothed in linen, with a writing case at his side. They went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of the Lord, the glory of the God of Israel, had gone up from the cherub on which it rested to the threshold of the house. The Lord called to the man clothed in linen, who had the writing case at his side, and said to him, "Go through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of those who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it." The others he said in my hearing, "Pass through the city after him, and kill. Your eye shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. cut down old men, and young women, little children and women, but touch no one who has the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the elders who were in front of the house. Then he said to them, defile the house, and fill the courts with the slain. Go. So they went out and killed in the city. Right? So this idea of, here's this man in linen going and marking the people that are disturbed by the idolatry. And so I think that probably has a foundational passage for this as well. But what is the seal? Now, as we get to later passages, we'll see in chapter 14, when we see the 144,000 again, as well as chapter 22, that the seal, or not the seal, but these people bear the name of God and the name of the Lamb on their foreheads. Right? So the seal is also understood as the name of Christ and the name of God. But there are a couple other passages that I think are important for us to read in this passage, in this connection. So if somebody reads 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 19, let's take that one first. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 19.
But God's firm foundation stands bearing the seal. The Lord knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity.
And so there's this idea kind of emphasized in chapter 7 that the sealing of these people is meant to identify that God knows those who are his. But then in Ephesians 1, we also have this idea of sealing and the sealing of Christians. And so if somebody read verses 13 and 14 of Ephesians 1.
Him you also trusted after you heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom also having believed you were sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, who is the guarantee of our inheritance until the redemption of the precious possessions to the praise of his glory.
So Paul talks about the Holy Spirit sealing us, right? Serving as a seal, a promise of our redemption, right? There's the idea here is the Spirit, the giving of the Spirit to Christians is a down payment of the inheritance that will be received at the end of time. And so there too we have this idea of as Christians we are marked, we are sealed. God protects us because he knows who we are. So how many people are sealed? Back in Revelation chapter 7. 144,000. Well, we've come to another one of these numbers. We talked about this one at the beginning of the semester. But obviously this is another one of those sections of Revelation that has spawned a lot of speculation over what this represents. In fact, there are entire religious groups that, as one of their core beliefs, holds something special about this number. But what does John mean when he's talking about the 144,000? Well, let's talk about the options. Right? So one option, one way that people have interpreted it is as a literal number of ethnic Israelites. I mean, because when you look at this number, it's not just 144,000 people, it's 144,000 from the people of Israel. Right? Now, of course, when we begin to think about this, 10 tribes were lost. So, this would be, literally difficult. But some people that tend to have a futurist approach favor the idea that this is a literal number of 144,000 ethnic Israelites. Others, also futurists, hold that this refers specifically to Israelites, but think that it's a symbolic number. It's not actually 144,000. The number itself is symbolic. The assumption being that at some point in the future, all Jews will become followers of Jesus. All right, so some people hold on to the Jewishness of this, with some people saying it's a literal number, some saying it's a symbolic number. A third group that holds on to the Jewishness of this says it's not future, it has something to do with the past. So these would be people of the preterist school that think Revelation has to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. The assumption being that it refers to a remnant of Jewish followers of Jesus in the first century. Most likely, again, a symbolic number, but these are the people who escaped the destruction of the temple, and that's what the sealing has to do with. Right? They're the followers of Jesus, but they're Jewish, and they escaped the destruction of the temple. The difficulty with that view, of course, is that these 12,000 come from each of those 12 tribes, but there was really only one tribe at the time of the first century. It was the tribe of Judah. I mean, there's some mixture from other people, but the 10 tribes have been lost. Simeon had pretty well been absorbed into Judah, and so the term Jew comes from the term Judah. So, most people, if they even knew what their heritage was, were from Judah. So, to say this refers to a specific group of Jewish followers of Jesus or Israelite followers of Jesus is kind of difficult. There would have to be a lot of symbolic here, even though you're still trying to connect it with Jews. A fourth view is that it refers to the complete number of God's people. Now, one of the good things about this view is that just about anybody can hold that view. If you're a preterist, if you're an idealist, if you're a futurist, you can hold the view that this refers to the totality of God's people. And so that's an option that has a lot of flexibility to it. And so that would be Jew or Greek. Gentile, it's Greek. Similar to that idea, and one that's kind of gained more and more favor in the past couple of decades, is that it's symbolic for the totality of the redeemed, but the image here is of an army being mustered. That God is calling forth an army, and that's why the people are being numbered. There are a couple of things that are offered as evidence for this view. One has to do with the similarity between this passage and the census passages in the Old Testament. If you think about the times in the Old Testament where God or the king or whoever numbers the people, it is usually connected with warfare. They want to know what's the size of the army. And so counted in the Old Testament censuses were males of military age. And so that's one of the, so they say, okay, the similarity here suggests that this is an army being counted. A second piece of evidence that is used to advance this idea of it's not just a general number of God's people, but specifically God's army, has to do with some other passages in Revelation, especially where this group appears. We mentioned, of course, that they show up again in chapter 14. Now, obviously, we won't take too much time with 14 because we'll eventually get there. But one of the things that's noted there in those passages is that they appear to be a select group, and they, verse 4, follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Right? And so they're very much connected with Jesus, following Jesus. And then if you go over to chapter 19, as the other rider on the white horse breaks into our story, coming to make war, verse 11, he is followed by, verse 14, the armies of heaven wearing fine linen, white and pure, following him on white horses. And a lot of people believe that refers to the 144,000. So here he comes to make war, and following him are this group of people. So that's another piece that said, okay, this is an army mustering passage. A third thing that is emphasized with this is the way in which conquering reappears several times throughout this book. And the emphasis on conquer, conquer, conquer. Right? So this is an army being gathered together. But even if you accept this view, it's quite clear that this is not a traditional military force. Right? Because we already talked about how in chapter 19, they go into battle wearing fine linen as their armor. Right? That's not good military strategy if you're talking about a traditional, military force. And so, this group is victorious because they don't fight. Right? This group is victorious, they succeed because they suffer for Christ. So even if this is an army, it's not like an earthly human army.